Welcome to the third episode of the Vows and Oaths series of In the Middle, hosted by Roy and Cedric. In this episode, they talk about taking personal responsibility in potentially seductive or even manipulative situations and the need for some to address their own internal struggles instead of trying to dictate the actions of others to accommodate them. They also speak to the dangers of spending too much time hyper-focusing on one's shortcomings. If you'd like to read along, reference passages are in the show notes, and we hope you enjoy this episode of In the Middle.
Okay, so of course I've been, like so many other people with, social media, inundated with a lot of conversations about the relationship between men and women, the frustrations that men have with women and women have with men. And so much of it, from my perspective, is born out of the generations of particularly within my own community, the generations of fatherlessness, the growing, trend towards people moving away from their faith traditions they grew up in, not being as biblically literate as they should, so that now people are easily offended with what is going on in the church, and instead of seeking in text and trying to find out God's mind or heart regarding the challenges they have, they're offended by the people, and whatever interactions that are happening socially in those environments, when that's not even what that space is really about. They call them worship services for a reason. All those other people there are supposed to be there for the same purpose, but some of them aren't as far along in that process.
They don't know.
And so you're going to have some collision. But if your intent is the same, if your eye is on God in those moments, you're able to place those interactions in the proper context and not throw away the entire faith because of, right? So these dynamics that I'm seeing between men and women, to me, look like the problems that people who are not healthy emotionally,
it's a
spiritually,
lot of projecting.
or socially are, of course, going to have. And I of course, I worry for my 12-year-old son's future. But I also commiserate with the women and the men. The women, their concern is the men have changed. The men's concern is the women have changed, and both are true.
Both are true, and I think a lot of it is still, though, a byproduct of not having the proper information. This is something that recently happened. And I was meditating back to the garden. Everything goes back to the garden.
Right.
Adam and Eve, Chava and Adam, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the tree of life. And I never realized it, but I always took the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and kind of split it in half. Half of it's good, half of it was evil. That's not the fact at all. The whole tree was bad. The good tree that was out there was the tree of life. And so then the rabbis come back and say, but you've already been, for lack of better terms, baptized into the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Use that information to elevate yourself to the tree of life. So when you look at, and we have a bit of a different take on darkness. And it's a hard thing to say. On the one hand, you could say all darkness is bad. That's not accurate, but it's also not accurate to say some darkness is good. It's just far more complicated than that. So you have something like going back to this, what happened before the battle, and you have desire, and you have lust. And you can say, yes, that's darkness, and that would be true. Well, what about when you're with your wife and you have desire and you have lust? How do you take something like and say, well, in this context, it's okay, it's not darkness. In this other context, it's darkness. No, it's darkness across the board. So that darkness or that desire is still darkness. It doesn't mean it's bad because it has darkness in it, but you have to understand what it is that you're playing with. So if you understand that some of these things that can lead you astray. So when we were talking about at church, and I had issues with the way women were dressed, and then I got to think, but it was projecting. And I knew that, but I was fighting with something. But the problem is it was in front of me. When you don't fight with it anymore, amazing, the problem's gone. So you do have to understand sometimes what you think is an issue in someone else is an issue in you.
Right.
It's just being revealed because of someone else. And that's not a bad thing, by the way. That's not a bad thing. If you're honest enough with yourself to know that it's you, now you can work on it. Now you can do things. Now you can start implementing, which is where we're at here, a structure to try to get you on the right path and cleaning those things up. If you never know it because the teaching's never there. Well, she's got a spirit of lust. Why? Well, she must have because I want to sleep with her. Well, maybe you have the spirit of lust. Right. You know what I mean? Maybe you're the problem and not her. Right. And I'm using lust because that's what stuck out coming out of this why we end up in a battle with Midian is because it was a lustful concept. Instead of understanding, no. Lust is being drawn out of me. The Brit Hadashah says that we are drawn out by the desires of our own flesh. Mm-hmm. So if someone's hitting you wrong, it doesn't have to be lust. I don't know. I've talked myself into all kinds of stuff through the years, when you're feeling a very strong emotion at something, some people call that discernment. And I think you've got to be careful with that.
Right.
It may not be discernment. It may be that something's getting triggered in you. And if you can understand how we got to these places in Torah, and if you can take apart the salient details, then you use this same moment. So for me, this same moment of reading this text is the time I look at myself in these areas. Right. And say, okay, let me think about, and we do this like the 9th of Av, and I think you're familiar with that holiday. The 9th of Av, which is July the something, is a holiday when you celebrate your distance from God. And that doesn't make any sense. But the rabbis say better to be away from God and know that you're away from God than to be away from God and think you're close to God. So you're actually looking for the things that separate you. We go through Passover. Once again, you're looking for the things that separate you. But even in Passover, there's great care. Matter of fact, the old halacha rule was you take a candle and you look through your cabinets for chametz or leaven, and once you're done looking, you blow that candle out.
Right.
Because there's also a perversion and a darkness that can take place there, meaning now I'm always on me and everything's wrong. I'm messed up in every aspect of life, and there's nothing I can do to fix. Well, that's another type of sin, you know. And it's not within the prohibition of it's not the don't do this or do this part sin, but it is that part of sin in the law of the land that just kind of destroys your life. So you get a time, and that's what I love about, you were talking about the Torah portions and just the idea of all of us being at the same place at the same time. You get a time to focus, micro-focus, hyper-focus on this right now, but by next week, we'll be focused on something else. So you can take a deep look, you can sanctify that time, which I believe adds spiritual fortitude to you when you're actually using that time for that, and you can deal with something, but you can't belabor it and you can't move in there. So.
Great. So I found the scripture.
Okay.
I think.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. James 5:16 says, so confess your sins one to another. Pray for one another so that you might be healed. The prayer of a godly person is powerful. Things happen because of it. And in Ephesians 4:25, therefore, having put away falsehood, let each one of you speak in the truth with his neighbor, for we are members one of another. So I think between those two, it captures what you were. Yeah.
Sometimes I have a dream and something gets said. I don't know where I was pulled. Somewhere I just heard,
it
when did you stop?
Talmud,
it could have been. Yeah. Because there's some stuff I'll kind of glance and blow and I go through it quick and I don't necessarily commit it, but something will kind of stick with me. So after all this took place, now we go to the attack of Midian. You want to read the first couple of, I think it's 32:1, right?
Right. So, this is Numbers 31. It's about to jump off. The Lord spoke to Moses. He said, pay the Midianites back for what they did to the Israelites.
Okay, what version are you reading?
Oh, you know NIV? What? That's and exactly. Yeah. So let me switch back to the King James. And the Lord spoke to Moses saying, take vengeance on the Midianites for the children of Israel. Afterward, you shall be gathered to your people. Which is rough.
That's real rough.
Right.
Because maybe in the context of this, someone listening didn't catch what we're saying. What is that saying? Afterwards, you will be gathered to your people.
You're going to die.
You're going to die. It's time for Moshe to die.
This is the end.
We lost Aaron last Torah Torah portion before last.
Right.
But there's an interesting thing about Aaron and Moshe. if so, right here you can go and read in the book of Joshua, and you're kind of synced up as to what's going on here.
Right.
And at the end of, I think it's 23 or 24, Josh says, I'm going to go the way of all men. That's how he defined his death.
Mm-hmm.
Here, the Lord saying, you're going to be gathered to your people. They didn't, can I say that the principality of death had no say-so in this conversation? Mm. Joshua went the way all men went. Death comes, you're out. It's the last principality put beneath Yeshua's feet. We will all fall victim to it at some point in our lives. Aaron and Moshe died, but they didn't fall victim to death. Mm. As a matter of fact, I think Aaron's was called the kiss of God. This was God that took them out. So yeah, that's pretty. So this is, yours said, I think mine says revenge. Mine says on verse 2, take revenge for the Israelites against the Midianites. And then when Moshe recites it, I think in a couple of scriptures later, he, instead of revenge of the Israelites, it's the revenge of God.
Right.
So that's how bad. The weird thing about this one, God had already judged all the people and already dealt with what he was dealing with us in this situation. There's not too many times we can go back and see where he goes after the actual people that caused the sin.
Right.
That's typically not the case. And so
he had something special he felt about this situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely. This one affected them a bit.
Right.
And again, one of us for enticing them. I don't want to say I'm always mindful. The Lord, he was talking to the Pharisees, and he said something to the effect of, your forefathers killed the prophets. Mm-hmm. And the response was, if we would have been there, then we wouldn't have done that. And he said, by doing so, you admitted that you're their children. So I try to be careful sometimes when I use the term forefathers, right, because of what's taken place here. He was mad for them. I was going to say enticing our forefathers. He was very upset at the seduction that led to idolatry. Idolatry by itself, I think, would be one thing. And we would have been judged for it. God would have dealt harshly with us. But some reason with this seduction that brought people into idolatry. And if you think about that and kind of apply some modern terminology on it, we wouldn't use idolatry as the term. We wouldn't use seduction. We might use manipulation as a term, mm-hmm, for a better deal for me, right, kind of a thing. Those same practices still take place. And not anything against salesmen, but there's some salesmen, when you go into places, the dishonesty is incredible. And what's funny, me and my wife was shopping for a car many years ago. And the guy was really touting I look like a really dumb guy. And so he felt like, I'm going to love this stereo so much in this car that I'm going to buy the car, which didn't even make sense. If I want to, if you want an expensive stereo, you don't get one with wheels, just get the right stereo on. But he was really pouring it on thick, trying to seduce me with the idea of this stereo on here. And so you kind of see it sometimes in those places but even maybe not even that bad, but where information is manipulated to try to get you to respond a certain way to make a deal, to come out of your mind, meaning what you know to be right, what you know to be wrong, what you would normally do, but there's some manipulation or seduction that maybe preys on you as a guy, or whatever. And that pulls you out of kind of your normal walk to get you to do something beyond that. That's what he's responding to here. So it's not just the idolatry, it's the seduction that got our forefathers to be idolaters.
Right. And that part, that's why I felt that God responded the way he did to this situation, because the Midianites had specifically attacked the relationship between God and the children of Israel. Absolutely. These are his chosen people. And it's clear they knew that. And we know they knew it because the prophet had told them. Yeah. The prophet that they tried to pray to curse the people told them, after how many times failing to curse them and only blessing them, look, not only can I not bless them, but here's what's going to happen to you, and you, and gave them the whole rundown of how bad things were about to get. So they knew that the real thing that the children of Israel had was their God, and they intentionally attacked that relationship. And they used seduction as the linchpin.
We don't even hear from the wives on this one.
No.
Like they're quiet because I would
Well,
say,
because many of them, they became widows because of that. So they didn't have
well,
to hear
after the fact, but I mean,
like,
while it was
how they feel about it, but yeah.
while it was taking place, I can, we know that when atonement was made after the golden calf, we can go to the Talmud and at least we have a framework or a story about what the women really thought about how dumb we were being. We don't even have that here.
Right.
Like, so whatever it was, it was that bad. But there wasn't even a brotherhood to say, hey, man, Cedric, maybe you don't want to do that, man. Let's think about this. The whole system broke down in this one swoop. But that's why also, we talk about community, brotherhood, sisterhood. I mean, my wife, a friend of ours, I can be kind of dumb sometimes, but they called her because they were going to buy a car. I'm like, what do they need you for to go buy a car? And then I'm reading this, I'm like, brilliant. The lady's a genius.
Right.
She brought someone else into her buying experience with her that was not making the purchase, that did not have the emotional attachment. So maybe they could play on her emotional strings. I'm not saying they did, but they could do that. But my wife ain't getting no car,
Right.
So they're not playing on her emotional strings. And what's interesting, when we bought this house, everyone can play on my emotional strings. I like to spend money. I'm the weakest link when it comes to our situation. So my wife handles the finances. But when we bought this house, I loved every house that we looked at. And this was becoming a problem. If I would have been single, doesn't matter that I wouldn't have had the money, I would have bought every house I looked at. Right. I just would have been in trouble. So then she decided, you've got to stop shopping houses with me. And so I'm like, okay, so you want me to pay for the house? Yes. So I'm going to go to work. I'm going to work night and day, blood, sweat, and tears. I'm going to pay for this house, and I have no say-so. And she said, yeah, the Lord's doing something. And I said, I'm out. But it was just the idea. She's hardcore when it comes to her purchase. There's some people that like to negotiate, and then there's those of us that like to feel good about a purchase.
Right.
I hate buyer's remorse afterwards. Make me feel good about it. I'm not quite like that, but still. But it still goes to the idea of your brotherhood, your friendship, your sisterhood. When you don't have it, when you can be taken out, or to know, if something's weighing on your emotional, that you bring somebody else with you like that to say, hey, come with me, because they can't sell you on it. I don't know how I got there.
That was good. So